In 2004, Swedish journalist Stieg Larsson dies at age 50.
I think he was the most important activist in Sweden the last 30 years.
Expo magazine was incredibly important.
The reactions from the groups that we wrote about, the far-right activists, was very aggressive.
But it's a trilogy of unpublished novels he leaves behind that propel him to literary superstardom.
Everybody said the books will not sell so much. So we said, okay, Stieg is dead and the story is over.
No one can put Lisbeth Salander away. She is a magic creature. The books by Stieg Larsson have sold in more copies than the Bible.
The success of the books will plunge those closest to Larsson in a bitter feud over control of his estate and the Millennium millions.
I think this is sort of a contest of who loved Stieg the most. And who can you say that, who's the winner of that?
And leaves the world with one final question. Was there another book?
He had a manuscript for a fourth book. 2/3 of it was already finished.
November 9th, 2004. Writer and journalist Stieg Larsson arrives at the Stockholm offices of Expo, the magazine he founded in 1995. He feels ill and weak. A steady diet of coffee, cigarettes, and fast food are starting to take their toll. Daniel Poole is a former colleague of Larsson's at Expo.
Stieg wasn't the role model if you wanted to live a healthy life.
Investigative reporter Ali Fagan explored the case in his documentary The Millennium Millions.
He smoked a lot, drank a lot of coffee, didn't work out, and worked extreme amounts a day.
Larsson's chest pains grow more severe. His co-workers decide to rush him to the hospital. One of his colleagues collects Larsson's backpack off the floor, a random act that will prove meaningful in the months to come. Writer and architect Eva Gabrielsson, Larsson's girlfriend of 32 years, is away on business.
And she got this call, and they told her what happened, and she, of course, ran to the train station and on the way to the hospital.
He has a heart attack, and hospital staff spends the next 40 minutes trying to revive him. In vain. The 50-year-old Larsson is declared dead at 4:22 p.m. Larsson's hands are still warm when Gabrielsson wraps them in her own.
After losing your life companion, the person you have lived with for 30 years, shared everything with, if you lose this person, of course it's gonna take you hard, and you're gonna be in a deep shock and sorrow.
Larsson's father Erland and his brother Joachim arrive from the north of Sweden. Magdalena Hedlund will later serve as their agent.
They were in complete shock when your son and your brother has died. It's a natural reaction, I would say.
Stieg Larsson biographer Jan Erik Peterson.
There was a lot of grief, a lot of sorrow, and a lot of bewilderment among those who worked with him because they didn't know what would happen to Expo.
It didn't take a long time before we decided we have to show all the people out there that we can actually exist without Stieg. Because that is what he wanted us to do.
Gabrielsson chooses the day the Nobel Prize is to be awarded as the day for Larsson's funeral. This way, the burial will go mostly unnoticed by enemies of Larsson's.
Stieg Larsson, he was quite famous as a journalist here in Sweden, writing about covering right-wing political extremism and the neo-Nazi movement.
Anna-Lena Lodenius collaborated with Larsson on a 1991 book exposing right-wing movements in Sweden.
We had a very special situation in Sweden at the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, because you could see that the racism and xenophobia were growing a lot, and you had lots of people reacting on that.
While Gabrielson is searching for mementos of her life with Larsson to share at the funeral, she comes across his 1977 will. In it, Larsson bequeaths all of his personal things and his writings to her.
She knew that there was a big heritage of Stieg Larsson, all his texts, all his political texts, all his books, and these new novels that was about to be published.
Larsson's wishes are clear, but the will isn't witnessed, and so it isn't valid. Eva learns from her lawyer that under Swedish law, that's a problem, because Larsson and Gabrielson aren't married.
There is a very weak protection for couples who are not married under the Swedish law.
Eva Gabrielsson and Stieg Larsson, they lived together for more than 3 decades, and they practically shared everything. She was also involved in his projects like Expo. She was very much involved in discussing with him, the details in the novels, the characters. Some of her knowledge as an architect you can find in some of the novels.
When Larsson dies, ownership of his estate is up in the air because Gabrielson is not his next of kin. Kurt O'Baxey is Stieg Larsson's friend and colleague at Expo magazine.
Everybody said the books will not sell so much. So we said, okay, Stieg is dead and the story is over, but the story is not over.
What is going to happen? We were thinking at the time, because we did not know if the books were going to be able to be published.
The books in question are 3 novels Larsson completed in the years prior to his death. Novels featuring journalist Mikael Blomqvist, who, like Larsson, strives to expose Sweden's social and political injustices. Linda Altrov Berg is a literary agent for the Swedish publisher Norstedts.
When we got to know that he had passed away, we had already indications from the market in Sweden that this was going to be something huge.
A battle is brewing over control of Stieg Larsson's legacy, one that will divide those who loved him and tarnish the beliefs that Larsson held most dear.
She was very bitter.
There is a really nasty blackmailing story here.
Stieg Larsson and Eva Gabrielson are lovers, colleagues, soulmates, but they are not married. When Larsson dies without a valid will in 2004, leaving a trilogy of soon-to-be-published books in his wake, Gabrielson is left wondering who will control how the Millennium novels will be released to the world. Carl Stig Erland Larsson is born on August 15, 1954. His family moves to Stockholm when Larsson is 1, but the city's cramped living conditions force his parents to send him away to his grandparents, 500 miles north of Stockholm.
They left him to his maternal grandparents, who were living outside a small village called Bjursele. So one can say that Stieg lived right in the middle of nowhere.
Fredrik Quistberg co-produced the Millennium Millions with Ali Fagan.
The Larsson family was not poor, but they were sort of a middle-class, hard-working family from north of Sweden.
His grandfather was a leftist man, and also his mother was a social democrat, and I think they gave him a lot of values when he was a very little child.
According to girlfriend Eva Gabrielson, this separation will mark Larsson's relationship with his family. 1963. Stieg returns to live with his parents after his grandfather Severin dies of a heart attack in his early 50s. The Larssons now live in Umeå in the north of Sweden, where the young Larsson becomes a voracious reader.
One of the things that intrigued him with science fiction was probably that it says something about the society today.
Stieg was brought up in a political family, in a family where you discussed, in a family where ideas were important.
He liked to write, and he got a typewriter when he was 12, I think, from his parents, so he sat there writing all the time.
And you have to remember that Stieg was a really nerd when it comes to crime novels.
The idea of creating Lisbeth Salander, I think, Stieg got from reading Astrid Lindgren's famous Pippi Longstocking about this anarchistic girl. And he was kind of thinking that when Pippi Longstocking would become like 21, 22 years old, she would be diagnosed with some brain disorder and put into an institution. And then she would come out and maybe be filled with revenge feelings and hatred against society.
Vivian Larsson, the mother of Stieg Larsson, was the first lady who started an equality community in the north of Sweden. And she had a big heart for everybody, and she died very early in her life.
This period is crucial in shaping Larsson's political views. Larsson grows restless and is eager to see more of the world. He relocates to Stockholm in the early 70s. Larsson meets political activist Eva Gabrielsson shortly thereafter.
They shared more or less everything, from politics, ideology, science fiction. They discussed everything every day, and they more or less worked together.
She was part of his projects, and she knew a lot about the things that he was writing about, and she was very interested in that.
Larsson begins his career as a journalist, writing and speaking about the rise of right-wing extremism in Sweden.
He was probably the foremost expert on right-wing political extremism in Sweden.
I don't think that Stieg Larsson made a self-portrait when he created the character Mikael Blomqvist, but there are of course similarities. Both are investigative journalists, and they have a strong drive, both of them, always trying to find out the truth, not afraid to dig in the sordid things in society.
It's actually risky to stand up for democracy. It's actually risky to say that you like the idea of a multicultural society. It's actually risky to say that you don't like racism.
Larsson is placed on a neo-Nazi list of dangerous journalists whose careers should be cut short.
We know for a fact that he received a lot of threats from neo-Nazis. I have myself heard sound recordings from his telephone, people threatening him to death.
It was the result of a political movement and the ideas in that political movement, which is about the right to kill people that you don't agree with, the right to kill people that are not allowed to be a part of your society or the society that you dream of.
Despite the death threats, Gabrielsson remains by Larsson's side. In fact, they are inseparable, but they decide not to marry.
They were, in one sense, one person, doing things together and discussing and thinking about different projects and so on. So they were kind of, they belonged to each other in a very clear way and a very beautiful way from what I saw.
They could easily have been getting married, but as many people in the leftist movement, and they would say that it's not important to be married. It's an old-fashioned way of being together and all that.
There is another reason that prevents the two from marrying. Martin Schultz is a law professor at Stockholm University.
One of the reasons they never got married is because of the work Stieg Larsson was doing, especially on the extreme right-wing movement.
If they would have gotten married, some of the contacts, details of their addresses and things like this would go public. That's how the registers work here in Sweden.
He didn't want to risk Eva's being dragged into that world, basically.
Keeping things private is Stieg's way of keeping Eva safe. Decades later, the decision not to marry will come back to haunt Gabrielsson. She spends the first half of 2005 trying to establish her legal entitlement to Stieg Larsson's estate. Larsson's father, Erland, and brother Joachim, who are initially supportive of her efforts, are now increasingly hard to reach.
She, of course, contacted the publishing house and asked what was going on. And first, I think she thought that she had the rights to be involved in the process of publish these books.
But a letter from the Swedish Tax Bureau confirms her very worst fears. She is to inherit nothing. Larsson's father and brother are the legal heirs to the estate, and immediately begin discussions with Norstedts on how to release the Millennium books. the books Larsson had been working on up until his death.
When the Swedish law finally decided that the estate, the father and the brother, should have the legal inheritance, we had to start talking to them about things that had to do with Stieg's affairs.
Eva, in that situation, it was very hard for her. First, she lost her life partner, and then she lost control over everything they worked with together.
Legally, there are no question marks at all in this case. Joachim and Erland Larsson inherited Stieg because there was no will between Stieg and Eva.
When the Larssons realized that they were, to inherit all these rights, they were also very surprised. They didn't know at first how they should handle all this.
Larsson's writings include not only the Millennium books, but a vast collection of articles and several non-fiction books about Sweden's tumultuous political climate.
Stieg Larsson, he wrote several books on the subject of right-wing extremism. One was called Extremhögern, probably one of the most in-depth reportage books on the subject.
We decided that we should make some kind of investigation and telling who are they and what the groups are operating and who's back of them.
Sweden Democrats is a nationalistic party with roots into back in the neo-Nazi movement. They're in the parliament. Their only focus is basically issues of immigration, and nowadays they're also very much focusing on the question of Islam in Sweden.
The book, released in 1991, raises the ire of the neo-Nazi party's staunchest supporters.
And during that time you could see race of xenophobia and racism in Sweden, and particularly many Nazi groups.
He dedicated his life to the anti-racist cause. And one thing that made him so special, I think that differs him from most other journalists, that he really took a debate with the right-wing people.
So I think he was the most important activist in Sweden the last 30 years.
Larsson co-founds the Swedish Expo Foundation in 1995 to counteract the growth of the extreme right and white power culture. He also becomes editor of Expo magazine.
Expo magazine was incredibly important, and he knew that they had Searchlight in Great Britain, they had like Monitor in Norway and Demos in Denmark, and he was a friend of all those people, and he wanted to do something similar in Sweden. So he talked a long time before he started Expo magazine that he would do something like this in Sweden.
We had a large group of young journalists and reporters who wanted to work for Expo, but there wasn't money enough to give a salary.
I've asked some of the persons who have worked with him, and they say that, well, maybe Millennium is some kind of idealized Expo. It's the Expo that Stieg would have wanted and loved, because it's got a much higher circulation, it's got much bigger resources than Expo and so forth.
There was Stieg, he was the eldest person in this group, and a few guys and two girls. And I believe today that these two girls, they gave also their character and their clothes and their tattoo to the character of Lisbeth Salander. Without these girls at the Expo, we would never have this Lisbeth Salander as we have today.
The reactions from the groups that we wrote about, the far-right activists, was very aggressive. They weren't used to getting reported about. They were used to living in the shadows, basically. So the reaction was to try to stop the magazine. He actually was there almost all the time, almost all his spare time. So even if it was a very small magazine, even if we had financial problems, he gave all his time for this magazine.
Starting in 1997, Larsson spends his evenings and weekends working on a new type of book, a fictional tale whose themes of violence against women are inspired by an event he witnessed when he was a teenager. It's a traumatic event that eventually leads to the creation of one of the most famous literary characters of the 21st century.
Two of his friends, they raped a little girl, and Stieg didn't do anything to help to this little girl.
Stieg Larsson dies and leaves an immense body of work that includes 3 unpublished novels. Some say he loosely bases Millennium's Mikael Blomkvist, the book's crusading journalist, on himself, while Lisbeth Salander takes the shape of a ghost from Larsson's past.
In the summer of 1969, Stieg Larsson and 2 friends went to a camping house, and 2 of his friends, they raped a little girl, and Stieg didn't do anything to help to this little girl. And when Stieg came home, he felt very bad and he could not sleep.
The girl's name is Lisbeth. The rape would forever mark the author, who vowed never to let such acts go unpunished, at least not in his novels.
And now Stieg has written over 2,000 pages, 25, 30 years later, just an answer maybe to this little girl in the north of Sweden. So this is the story.
Larsson begins writing the Millennium saga in 1997.
When he was working at Expo, his colleagues used to see him sit and, grin with a smile on his face. And that was when he was actually, instead of writing things to publish in Expo, he was actually working on his novels, because he was so passionate about it.
His main project was to finish those 3 books, and he wrote them at the same time. And before he even went to the publishing company, he had these 3 books.
He had a way of writing, a way of expressing himself, which you, by the way, can see in the books. I remember the first time I read the books, I could almost hear Stieg's voice, basically, because he was this very Stiegish way of writing.
And he was very interested in crime novels that tries to tell something about problems in the society and the political situation. So when I learned that he actually tried to make these kind of books himself, I was not surprised.
The themes in the book, for example, violence against women, is a part of what Stieg always talked about, but that he couldn't write in Expo because Expo was kind of isolated to confronting organized intolerance.
He was not expecting all these success. All these things to be famous, and this book would sell so much. He said me he wanted to sell about 1 million copies in Scandinavia and Germany. That was his dream, It was the biggest dream he had.
Some people, have a garden. Some people watch football, and he writes crime novels.
In the fall of 2003, Gabrielson returns home with a copy of the manuscript for The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. It has been returned to sender from one of Sweden's largest publishers. But Gabrielson isn't going to take no for an answer.
Well, Eva Gabrielsson, she has always been a tough person.
Weeks later, the pristine manuscript is sent back to Larsson. In fact, it's too pristine.
They received the first manuscript of the first book, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, but they actually never read it.
A friend of Larsson's with connections to Swedish publishers offers to pitch the novel to Norstedts. The reaction from the company is immediate.
We at Norstedts were so thrilled when Stieg came to us with his 3 wonderful manuscripts, and we started to make plans together with him, both for publishing his books and selling them, rights for translation as well as film rights.
Stieg wanted to use the money that he got from the books to secure the magazine Expo. And he also wanted to get money for different anti-racist activities. That was part of the goal.
So normally when an author comes to a publishing house, they have 1 script, hopefully 1 script. And in this case, we had like 3. 2 entire scripts and a 3rd one almost done. And our plan was to publish 1 every year.
Norstedts gives Larsson an advance against future royalties on the 3 books of 591,000 Swedish krona, or $88,000 US. He and Gabrielson agree to use the money to pay off their mortgage and slowly begin to make plans on how to use future payments, including donating royalties from a 4th book to Expo magazine.
Stieg Larsson had plans on writing 10 books about Lisbeth Salander and these characters.
Stieg was very excited when the books were accepted by Norstedts because he really wanted to become a successful and good and established crime writer on the same level as the well-known Swedish crime writers like Henning Mankell.
He said that, well, except from buying a house outside Stockholm, I will use this money as a platform to spread my ideas, not have to care about what people think of what I'm writing, not have to be scared of losing my job.
Publisher Norstedts chooses the Frankfurt Book Fair, the biggest such fair in the world, as an opportunity to sell the international rights to the books.
And it turned out that there was a lot of interest, and international publishers queued before the Norstedts stand to get reading copies.
We thought that there was so much time with Stieg, but there wasn't.
But by May of 2005, Eva Gabrielsson, Larsson's longtime companion, learns that Joachim and Erland Larsson are the rightful heirs to her late partner's estate, including his unpublished novels. She believes that they are unworthy of managing his legacy and claims that Larsson's relationship to his brother and father was tenuous at best.
It stood quite clear that they weren't that close. I mean, Joachim Larsson, when I asked him, when did you meet your brother last time? He couldn't answer first. And then he said about 2 years before he died. That was the last time they met.
When I was getting a ticket to go to Umeå, he told me, you have to visit my father, because I haven't visited him, which is a very strange thing to do. But he asked me to visit him, and just to pop by and say hi. And I did.
Every time I visited his town, Umeå, he asked me to have a lunch with his father. And he always called his father for Erland, not father, as we say in my mother language, Kurdish. And I was very angry to him, how he can say Erland to his father.
They live in different parts of Sweden. They could, I think, have a closer contact. But, you know, Stieg Larsson was a very political person, and he was very concerned in politics. He didn't share this interest with his brother that much as he shared it with Eva Gabrielsson. That's obvious.
Magdalena Hedlund does not agree.
The relationship Stieg had with his father and with his brother, it seems to me as it was a perfectly normal relationship. They lived far away from each other, but they had contact on the phone and by email, and they saw each other every now and then.
She thinks that she is the one who knew Stieg, and that's the reason why she wants to have control over his writings.
I think this is sort of a contest of who loved Stieg the most. And who can you say that, who's the winner of that?
The memories of those days are far from Gabrielsson's mind upon learning that Joachim and Erland Larsson will inherit the entirety of Stieg Larsson's estate, and they have very different ideas about how it should be managed. It will soon create a divide between Gabrielsson and the Larssons, and things are about to get ugly.
It's really one of the worst deals in the film history, I think, for a success script like the Millennium Trilogy.
She was never interested in the money. She was only interested in the heritage of Stieg Larsson, her life companion.
Eva Gabrielsson claims that her lover and life partner, writer Stieg Larsson, was never close to his brother Joachim and his father Erland, and that only she has the right to manage his estate. As the release of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo grows near, the publisher Norstedts and the new heirs of the estate revisit Larsson's unsigned publishing deal. New negotiations are begun, negotiations that to some are to the Larsson family's disadvantage.
If Eva Gabrielsson would have had the rights to the novels and to all Stieg Larsson's texts, it would have been much trickier for Norstedts, the publishing house, to make new deals. Had to write new contracts, this time with the legal heirs, Joachim and Erland Larsson. And we actually got hold of these new contracts and showed them to some experts, and most people told us that these were lousy. I mean, having the fact that this was an international success, these were lousy contracts.
That, of course, was very convenient for Norstedts. Here they have two, older guys from northern Sweden that didn't know anything. Of course, that was much easier to deal with than this Eva Gabrielsson, who was really a fighter.
Neither the Larssons nor Norstedts revealed the exact dollar amounts. But according to Ali Fagan and Fredrik Quistberg, it's clear that the publisher makes the most of the Larssons' lack of knowledge of the publishing world.
If it would have been Eva Gabrielsson they would have to negotiate with, it would have been a completely different affair.
For the publisher Norstedts, it's an opportunity to build a franchise.
The first book had come out and it was already a big hit. And everybody was expecting the second book, and everybody knew there were 3 books, a trilogy. But, I mean, it all exploded.
Gabrielsson disapproves of the English title of the first book, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and will write in her autobiography that the late author preferred the more literal translation, Men Who Hate Women. She suggests that the characters and events portrayed in the Millennium books are based on her life experiences with Larsson, and teases that while she didn't necessarily ghostwrite the books, she and Larsson did often write together.
In some situations, you could have a special case for compensation, and that would be if Eva would have been seen as an author of some of his works. It's very difficult to bring proof on that afterwards, that it was in fact a collaborative effort.
It wasn't easy for her to find herself so put aside from everything that they had shared together. So I think she started to fight to get these rights back.
Even though she's at risk of losing her home, Gabrielsson's true motive appears to be neither the money nor the Millennium books themselves.
The big thing for her was not the 3 novels. This was a hobby project for Stieg Larsson and for her also in a sense. The real concern for her was the political text, the books that he had written about the right-wing movements here in Sweden, all the texts that he had been written.
Gabrielsson believes that Larsson's 4 non-fiction books on Sweden's extreme right movement and the countless magazine articles he wrote are just as important a commodity as the Millennium books. If not financially, then at the very least intellectually. She wants control over all of his work, both fiction and non-fiction.
I don't think Eva Gabrielsson is a gold digger. She made a proposal to Joachim and Alan Larsson that they should be given all the money from the Millennium Trilogy. She just wanted to have the control over the books. She wanted that control, she explained to us, because she didn't want to see Stieg's works too commercialized.
Ali Fagan explains the finer points of Gabrielsson's proposal.
They actually said that if you want, you can put in how many % of the income from the books that you want Eva Gabrielsson to have. And they said that if you put 0, it's 0. If you put 50, it's 50. But so they could actually fill in the amount of money. If they didn't want to give her any money, they could have written 0.
But the Larssons refuse her proposal. Meanwhile, the first book is beginning to make waves all around the world.
Not only in Sweden, not only in Norway, in Denmark, in Germany, in France, in Spain, in Italy, they saw it everywhere. And when the books were launched in USA, Canada, UK, that's when the explosion came through with readers. It was immense.
This is kind of book that you would take it up and then you wouldn't put it down. I mean, this is what makes a success. But I could not have realized how big. I mean, this is huge, worldwide.
The book is a hot topic of discussion.
I think every publisher and every reader, in fact, has his or her idea of what they think is the magic in the books. No one can put Lisbeth Salander away. She is a magic creature. Before Stieg, no one had described a female main character who wasn't afraid of anything, who had this strength, who had had a tough life, but who stood up and had strong ideas and ideals.
I think the Millennium books are not really great literature, but they are really great crime writing.
Well, the popularity of his books didn't mean that much for Expo, surprisingly enough. My idea was that, now his books is famous all over the world, which means that we will have, a lot of people subscribe to the magazine, a lot of people giving us money and, supporting us. But no.
Linda Altrov Berg recalls Norstedt's initial pact with the author.
So when Norstedt signed Stieg Larsson, our promise to him was, of course, to sell as many books as possible in Sweden, first of all, but also to sell the rights for translation in as many countries as possible. Plus, we also had this agreement to sell his film rights.
Not so, writes Eva Gabrielson in her book. She claims that Larsson owned the film rights and had been holding out for a Hollywood adaptation when he died. Nevertheless, Norstedts orchestrates a deal for the Larssons in which the 3 books will be turned into 6 movies for Swedish television, then released worldwide as a trilogy of theatrical films.
The deal that Alan and Joachim closed, it's a very crappy deal. It's really one of the worst deals in the film history, I think, for a success script like the Millennium Trilogy.
Neither Norstedts nor the Larssons divulge any details. When Gabrielson makes a plea to the Larssons for editorial control over the films, they tell her in no uncertain terms that she will not have any. Further proof for her that the Larssons are building a commercial empire out of her late partner's legacy, which goes completely against what Stieg would have wanted.
It would have been completely understandable if she was interested in the money, because it's huge amounts of money. But she was never interested in the money. She was only interested in the heritage of Stieg Larsson, her life companion.
October 2005. After months of legal squabbling, Gabrielson learns she has no claim to the late author's estate. She will lose everything, including her apartment, unless she fulfills one important request.
He had a manuscript for a 4th book. 2/3 of it was already finished.
A file on the laptop computer recovered from the Expo offices on the day Larsson died becomes a huge bargaining chip. Could Eva Gabrielson be in possession of a 4th Millennium book?
This is a commercial dynamite.
Eva Gabrielson learns that she will have no say over the legacy of her late partner, author Stieg Larsson. She watches in horror as the estate's legal heirs, her de facto in-laws Joachim and Erland Larsson, are given full control over how to release and possibly exploit 3 of the most popular novels in the 21st century. But could there be one more? On the day he died, Stieg Larsson carried with him not only a dying heart, but a heavy laptop computer as well. The computer, property of Expo magazine, contained an unfinished novel.
He had a manuscript for a 4th book. 2/3 of it was already finished. And this was all in his working laptop that he used when he was working for Expo.
There has been, of course, a lot of rumors, and people are claiming that there are so and so many pages written, 150 pages, 300 pages, and so forth.
Upon leaving Expo, one of the magazine's staff members takes the backpack containing Stieg's laptop with her. It's practically an afterthought.
This is a commercial dynamite. After all this success, there is a 4th manuscript already almost written, clear, finished. So, of course, Alan and Joachim Larsson, who actually has the legal rights for this, what is written in this computer, they tried to get a hold of this computer.
What happens to the computer in the days and weeks following Stieg Larsson's death is unclear. Expo releases a statement saying they are unaware of its whereabouts, while Gabrielson teases that she knows where it is. without admitting that it's in her possession.
Joachim and Alan Larsson, they actually own half of the apartment that Stieg and Eva were living in. So what they did was that they said that if you don't give us the computer back, we will make you thrown out of the apartment. So I think she took that very, very hard.
But the fourth Millennium manuscript is Gabrielson's ace in the hole, and she isn't giving it up without a fight.
There is a really nasty blackmailing story here.
In December 2005, Joachim threatens Gabrielson's lawyer that Norstedts will cancel the publishing of the second and third novels in the series unless Gabrielson delivers the computer to them. Norstedts, however, say they know nothing about the existence of a fourth book.
As far as Norstedts and I'm concerned, we have never seen a fourth manuscript. We have read about it in papers, we have heard people talk about them in TV shows, but we have never seen not even a glimpse of it. So rumors, as far as it comes to us, are rumors.
I know very little about the fourth book. What I know, I have basically read in the papers, lots of speculations. Joachim and Erland do not know where the manuscript is. I don't know if Eva knows where it is.
The Larssons' threats prove baseless as Norstedts releases the second and third books in 2006 and 2007. Like the first novel, they are huge bestsellers. Mysteriously, the fight over the fourth book is dropped entirely, and no explanation is ever given.
In 2008, Eva Gabrielsson and Erland and Joachim issued some kind of statement that the book was not going to be published. As far as I know, this is how it stands right now.
For people loving Millennium, it's a shame that it hasn't been published. But the question is, who would finish it?
In a way, I think that maybe it's good enough. Why longing for a fourth book? I think 3 books might be enough.
Of this great work of Stieg Larsson, what has come out? A bitter conflict. Who would have wanted that? The least person that wanted that would be Stieg Larsson himself.
Stieg Larsson was a very idealistic person, and he didn't care about money. And to see this process about money afterwards, I think it's very sad in many ways.
However, there is no denying the success of the Millennium Trilogy in its first 7 years.
The 3 books by Stieg Larsson have sold in approximately 65 million copies worldwide. You are in Sweden, and in Sweden we are 9.5 million inhabitants. We have sold close to 3.5 million copies of all 3 books.
Well, I think it's important for Joachim and Erland to handle the rights in a respectful way and to try to think what they think Stieg would have wanted to do and to manage it as well as possible. But of course they would have been happier if it could have been done in cooperation also with Eva.
I want to mention Denmark, which is a small country. The publisher says that the books by Stieg Larsson have sold in more copies than the Bible. I do not know how she had counted it, but I'm sure she's right. It's amazing. It's totally like cuckoo. How could it happen?
Gabrielson's continued attempts to obtain the rights to Stieg Larsson's work are met with the same answer each time. No.
The fight and the media publicity over the money is maybe one of the saddest things about the success of his books. And I would guess that Stieg would be the one who hated the situation most of everyone.
At first, I think that a lot of people felt compassion to Eva Gabrielsson's story, and the media picture of the Larssons family was that they were very greedy.
Well, I would say initially they have kind of suffered in silence. They have responded to some of the journalists' questions, but they have also felt for a long time that that the journalists weren't really interested in reporting what they had to say.
Then, in the fall of 2007, something unexpected happens. The Larssons give their share of the apartment to Gabrielson. Skeptics believe the Larssons are bowing to public pressure.
The Swedish media had a very fixed picture of who the bad guy was in this story and who the good guy was.
The Larssons' apparent goodwill doesn't end there.
On one occasion, Erland and Joachim were offering 20 million kronor to Eva Gabrielsson.
The Larssons' offer also includes one of the 3 seats on the board which manages the Larsson estate. But further inquiries reveal that Gabrielson's power would be limited to accessing contracts and financial statements. Full control over the estate would remain with the Larssons.
She didn't want to have that. She said she didn't want to be bought by this money.
Because this is not a question about the money, it's a question about who has the control over the legacy of Stieg Larsson.
In April 2010, Gabrielson's lawyer asks the Larssons for control over the author's political writings only. 2 months later, the Larssons announce that they wish to permanently stop all negotiations.
There's like a canyon between them.
She has wanted to handle the rights on her own and to be the one who has the saying about what should be done and not. And there the discussion have ended. So.
2011, Gabrielson releases a book of her own, an autobiography. In it, she makes inflammatory accusations against the Larssons and how they handled the estate.
This was her way, I think. I do not know her. This was her way of answering a lot of questions to a lot of people at the same time.
In it, she suggests her life with Larsson inspired the characters and events in the Millennium universe, and speaks out against what she considers outdated Swedish laws that prevent common law partners from enjoying the same rights as married couples. She also suggests that she knew Stieg Larsson better than anyone, including his own family.
I think that Joachim was upset when reading Eva Gabrielsson's book, partly because it contains things that are not true, and partly it very much gives the impression that Stieg should not have had any contact with his father and brother.
The Larssons take to the internet to challenge some of Gabrielson's accusations. The website and further interviews appear to improve the Larssons' public image.
I think people then started realizing that the situation wasn't as easy as it had been pictured before.
Internationally, we know for a fact that Eva Gabrielsson has a lot of support. But here, I think that people think that, well, they had the legal rights. What could they do? This is not a legal question, it's a moral question.
In 7 short years, the Millennium books have sold more than 65 million copies and spawned a successful trilogy of Swedish films, as well as an American remake.
Some of the money that nowadays comes to Stieg's brother and his father actually are given back to Expo, a very small part of the money though. It's 2 million Swedish crowns a year, which makes it possible for us to have like 4 or 5 people hired, which is very important. I mean, we're very thankful for that.
In 2008, publisher Norstedts and the Larssons established the Stieg Larsson Prize, which is awarded to a person or an organization working against racism and oppression. But the ending of Stieg's story is far more ironic than that of any book or movie.
Joachim and Erland Larsson, they are in a tricky situation also, because I mean they're probably one of the wealthiest people in north of Sweden. If they started to flash with this money and buy villas and cars, and people would probably be annoyed and point fingers at them and say, look at the greedy Larsson family.
Naturally, they are sad that he was never able to experience this the success that he had on his own.
The Larssons are at a moral impasse.
I don't think that they can actually use all this money before they solve the situation with Eva Gabrielsson. How that is going to happen, I don't know. But until then, all these Millennium millions, they're still on a bank account somewhere.
Stieg Larsson was a fighter and would have no doubt used his international fame to keep fighting. But his death raises the question, had he lived to see his success, how many more books did he have in him? And more important to Stieg himself, how much more might his pleas for tolerance have resonated around the world? Jerry Garcia, celebrated guitarist and vocalist for the Grateful Dead, dies just 8 days after his 53rd birthday.
He'd checked into rehab the night before he died.
Friends, family, and deadheads around the world mourn the loss of a man known best for his free-loving communal spirit and unforgettable live shows.
People would get really high and dance with great abandon while the Grateful Dead were on stage really high playing with great abandon.
I saw the Grateful Dead in concert 194 times, and that's not enough, but that's as many as I got to see.
But the feel-good vibe disappears when it comes time to divvy up Garcia's multi-million-dollar estate.
If Jerry were watching Beyond the Grave, he'd be laughing and laughing and laughing.
The more famous they got, the more beloved they were, the more they attracted opportunists.
August 9, 1995. Jerry Garcia, Grateful Dead frontman, dies of a fatal heart attack at Serenity Knolls Drug Rehabilitation Center. He is 53 years old.
Jerry's death was a national tragedy. His obit ran on the front page of the New York Times as the lead news story of that day.
Family, friends, fans, and deadheads are shaken by the news of Garcia's death.
When certain people die, it just makes you sad. Whether it's John Lennon, whether it's John F. Kennedy, whether it was Jerry Garcia, it's the end of an era.
In San Francisco, a tie-dyed flag is hoisted over City Hall to pay tribute to the man who epitomized 1960s counterculture, free love, peace, and of course, rock and roll. Garcia's name stood not only for his music, but for a way of life.
Well, Jerry Garcia was a great American musician and a cultural figure of tremendous prominence and value. He was a founder and leading light of the Grateful Dead, who were founders and leading lights of the San Francisco music scene, and a sort of cultural revolution that sprang up in the mid-60s on the West Coast. And Jerry was one of its most articulate spokesmen and leaders, although he constantly and permanently disavowed the role of leader, he was a leader just by nature.
Several days after the singer's passing, a public memorial takes place in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. With Garcia gone, deadheads around the world find themselves left with a gaping hole in their lives.
When Jerry died was the saddest day of my life, without a doubt. Following the Grateful Dead was not just a tour, it was an adventure. We loved meeting our friends, listening to the music, hanging out in the parking lot, hanging out after the shows, staying together. So it was a huge change in my lifestyle. There was nothing to follow around anymore.
But as the days and weeks go on and the initial shock wears off, bigger problems arise for those closest to the singer's heart, including his widow, Deborah Coons. She and Jerry have only been married for a year and a half.
Deborah's a very refined, sort of a private school girl type, trust fund, East Coast, not a hippie mama, not a earth mother, not a funky, fun gal.
Jerry's unexpected death makes Deborah the co-executor of the estate, and it's a mess.
Jerry did not have high priority in doing estate planning. He had many other interests, his music, his art, personal matters. I had drafted several wills for him over time, and as different events occurred in his life, we tried to get him to do new wills or do new estate planning as best we could.
Under Hellman's counsel, Jerry Garcia writes his final will. But what Garcia's will does not take into account is the host of other financial arrangements the king of generosity made with ex-lovers, friends, and even former employees.
Well, when someone dies of some fame or notoriety, you do tend to get a lot of unusual type of claims, and some of them totally inappropriate, and they all have to be looked at with seriousness and attempt to see whether or not there is any validity to them, and then move forward and take the legal course to resolve the issues.
I don't think Jerry personally gave a damn about money. There are famous stories of car repair guys, working on his car and finding checks and cash stuffed under seats and in the glove box and stuff like that. Jerry really just wanted to play music and he wanted to do his art, and I don't think he cared about money. He liked, being able to take care of people.
Garcia's generosity may have stemmed from the fact that his father wasn't around for long when he grew up. August 1st, 1942. Jerome John Garcia, named for composer Jerome Kern, is born to loving parents Ruth Marie and Joe Ramon. When Jerry is 3, his brother, Tiff, chops off one of Jerry's fingers in a woodcutting accident. Garcia loses the middle finger on his right hand. Less than a year later, another tragic accident strikes the family. Garcia's beloved father drowns.
Jerry was raised by his grandmother. His mother was an emergency room nurse and owned a bar, a working man's bar near the foot of the Bay Bridge. She was not a real active parent. The grandmother raised Jerry and his brother Cliff as latchkey kids out in the Excelsior, which is sort of a, on the edge of San Francisco, working class neighborhood.
And it's while living with Grandma that Garcia's own love for music really begins.
He told of having taught himself how to play the guitar and not even knowing how to tune it at first. But he immediately launched into, Chuck Berry and all the stuff that was happening in those days.
In his late teens, Garcia ventures into more new sounds and styles.
After he got out of the Army, he was living down on the peninsula and started hanging out with these guys that were more interested in folk music. He was hanging out in the sort of intellectual scene in Palo Alto near Stanford University, where the coffee houses and Kepler's bookstore and things were.
At Kepler's bookstore in 1963, a 21-year-old Jerry Garcia meets Sarah Rupenthal. Not long after they meet, Rupenthal and Garcia get married and have a daughter together.
I don't know how to describe Jerry Garcia and her relationships with women, except to say that he fell in love often, that he really didn't want to be tied down into long-term marriages, and he tended to stray. So his marriage to Sarah Rupenthal was not a long marriage.
Garcia's world is turned upside down when both LSD and Bob Weir enter his life.
Bob Weir was the teenage Hollywood star of the band. He was about 19 years old, and he was gorgeous and had a good voice. And of course, he played bluegrass and folk music. And that was the nucleus that would become the Grateful Dead.
They began by playing in pizza parlors and bars and the kind of stuff that every American band basically started out doing. But they started getting weird in a hurry because that's the kind of people they were. And then when LSD entered the picture, it sort of blew the doors off the entire thing.
There was a needed drug culture with the Grateful Dead. Jerry's on record as commenting on how important LSD was in his life, how it opened his eyes, the doors of perception, I guess. LSD opened his eyes and showed him a world that he didn't realize existed.
Pretty soon they had a whole little scene going up in the hills of La Honda. Decided that they wanted to hold public events where people would take LSD and groove, and there would be spontaneous happenings. These were called the acid test, and they needed a band.
Garcia and his band joined the acid test party.
The acid test was a sort of participatory event. Everybody who came to the acid test paid $1 to get in. There was no performer versus audience thing. Everybody was part of the happening. You'd come in costume. Everybody created the event together. The Grateful Dead were there as sort of the house band. They would just play and listen to each other and create musical paths together because they were all high and they were all incredibly open-minded, and they were in this situation that gave them unlimited license to play or not play.
When you have one genius musician in a band, the gravity just tilts toward that person. And Jerry was somebody whose musical abilities and whose artistic reach was just beyond ordinary people.
One of the musicians was a blues player, a harmonica player, Pigpen. Let's see, we had Bob Weir, who loved classical music and rock and roll. We had Phil Lesh, who was a classically trained musician, and also big band and jazz. So we had this amazing amalgam then of American music. That's what's Grateful Dead music, blends it all together.
The Grateful Dead are on their way to major national success, selling millions of records. But the rock and roll lifestyle is taking its toll on Jerry as he plays more than 80 shows a year.
That 3-show run at Cal Expo in 1994 was just frightening. He looked very near death at that time.
Jerry Garcia, frontman for the Grateful Dead, dies, leaving behind friends, family, devastated fans, and several former lovers who would soon be embroiled in the mother of all legal battles over his estate. But in 1964, they are just beginning their unconventional rise to greatness. The Grateful Dead are not like any other band. Their success stems from a steady growth of followers, not album sales.
The Grateful Dead in San Francisco drew a crowd unlike any other band. They'd show up at Winterland on public transportation, get off the bus and crowd in the place. They smelled like hell, they dressed like crazy bastards, and they danced all night long. The band itself was indistinguishable from the audience. They were very much a part of the same culture that the people who went to their shows were. And the same people would come night after night. The band never played the same show. It wasn't like a show business thing. They'd get up on stage and start where they wanted to start, and they'd go where they wanted to go, and they'd finish when they wanted to finish.
And the Grateful Dead becomes known as the band that never plays the same show twice. The ticket-buying followers are known as Deadheads. Wherever the band went, their Deadheads went with them to hear the music that was all their own.
A Deadhead is someone who is passionate about Grateful Dead music, who listens to their music, who hopefully, although they can't see them anymore, chances are a real Deadhead is somebody who saw the Grateful Dead performing up until 1995 when they stopped performing. Their business model of touring and selling tickets rather than selling vinyl and records and recordings is also part of their musical legacy. It was this interaction between the audience and the band, which just didn't capture on vinyl, didn't get, and as a result, not being captured on vinyl, it didn't broadcast well over the radio either.
In the mid-60s, as the Grateful Dead are getting bigger, Jerry meets his second wife, Carolyn Adams, a member of the Merry Pranksters. A group formed around author Ken Kesey, living communally and experimenting with psychedelic drugs. Adams was known to her friends as Mountain Girl.
Mountain Girl was so beautiful, such a gorgeous young lady, and she lived in a house up the hill from Kesey and the Merry Pranksters of La Honda, which was how she got the nickname Mountain Girl.
At the time, she had a child from Ken Kesey called Sunshine. And they were both married when they met, yet they started shacking up together, as you'd call it in the 60s.
Although Adams is still married at the time, she moves into the same house where Garcia is living in the hippie Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco.
She was kind of the mother figure for the whole Grateful Dead scene early on. She kind of took care of everybody. They all lived communally early in their career in the very early 60s in San Francisco. And she was the den mother, so to speak. I think that's the title that they bestowed on her. So she was an amazing gal.
But even in the early days, the band's success depends on Jerry being away for long stretches. Jerry and Mountain Girl spend the late 60s and early 70s together, although their relationship is less than conventional.
Jerry and Mountain Girl did not live together like husband and wife day in, day out for 30 years. He had a tendency to stray and have relationships with other women, and this is something that Mountain Girl unfortunately knew all too well.
By the 70s, the Grateful Dead have reached national fame.
And over time, as the Grateful Dead legend grew and the Grateful Dead's audience grew and the Grateful Dead's economic and cultural presence grew, he wound up being the center of it and the focus of a huge and ultimately, I think, really burdensome kind of universe. And it took a tremendous toll on him.
For Garcia, touring leads to other women and more drugs.
In the late 70s, the drugs changed, and it was a change for the worse. More people, I think, in and around the band and in the audience were taking cocaine. And so it kind of just began to kind of fall apart.
As the 70s turn into the 80s, the singer's health and drug use go from bad to worse.
Mountain Girl, she didn't have a problem with psychedelics and pot and, soft drugs, but she was alarmed by the narcotics. And I don't think she knew what to do with an addicted husband and father of her children.
But in 1981, despite their history of ups and downs, 20 years and 2 daughters together, Jerry and Mountain Girl decide to marry backstage at a Grateful Dead concert.
Over the years, Jerry and Mountain Girl's relationship changed a lot, especially after there were children. And I think he found the duties of being a father and house husband to be somewhat beyond him. He was interested in playing music. He was interested in getting high.
Jerry's health really started to degrade, I think, around that time. And I remember in 1983 and 1984, you listen to the tapes and you can just hear people chewing their teeth in the band. The music is fast and it lurches from one thing to another. It had lost a tremendous amount of its grace, and it had lost a tremendous amount of its patience.
In 1986, at the age of 43, Garcia collapses and ends up in a diabetic coma for 5 days. While the Grateful Dead cancel their fall tour following Garcia's collapse, as soon as the dedicated frontman feels ready, he decides the show must go on. And despite his precarious condition, the rocker does not change his lifestyle.
I believe Jerry felt obligated to continue to tour. He was the de facto leader, after all, of the Grateful Dead. Even though he didn't care to have that title, he was in fact the leader. He had this magical, amazing, charismatic personality that just attracted people to him. That's why we followed them around. That's why the musicians stuck with him for 30 years, the same band members for 30 years.
There was a huge amount of pressure on Jerry. He was the center of an immense universe, and there was a huge amount of money coming in. They were grossing like $50 million a year between their concerts and their merchandise and all this other stuff. And I think that the people in the band and the people around him had just profoundly mixed feelings, because I think that they knew it was killing him. I think they knew he was tired of it, but it was really, really hard to say no.
In 1993, Garcia and Adams agree to divorce. Just a few months later, Garcia marries his third wife, Deborah Coons, a woman he had known 2 decades earlier.
At the time Jerry did marry Deborah, there was a good celebration. The family was all there, and it was a happy time. Everybody seemed to be getting along quite well.
But despite his new marriage, the singer's drug use does not slow down.
That 3-show run at Cal Expo in 1994 was just frightening. He looked very near death at that time, and it was painful to watch him, and the music was really, really suffering from it. And you could see all of the other guys in the band putting out extra energy. They were going to hold this thing up one way or another, and be there for him. If he chose to play, if he showed up ready to engage, they wanted to be there for him.
On August 8th, Garcia checks into Serenity Knolls Drug Rehabilitation Center. He dies the next day.
When Jerry died, it was not a surprise, and I had been grieving his loss for quite some time already.
As Deadheads are grieving Jerry's death, even the funeral becomes a battlefield.
Once Jerry died, just everything went crazy.
We might want to talk about the burial, because that was all nutty.
Rock and roll icon Jerry Garcia dies, leaving behind a multi-million-dollar estate, not to mention a host of monetary promises. Promises that send those that the Grateful Dead's frontman loved most into raging battle. Garcia's loved ones struggle to make sense of all he leaves behind. Garcia's widow, Deborah Coons, bears the brunt of it.
Well, Jerry Garcia's will really wasn't the problem. In fact, if there's one document that was fairly well prepared and actually witnessed and notarized, it was his will. The problem was everything else. It's fine to have all of these relationships, but his intentions with respect to providing for them was less than clear. The distribution of assets and the role of the executor was very much in dispute.
Once Jerry died, everything went crazy. The linchpin had been pulled out of the Grateful Dead, and it just spun out of control. Nobody knew what to do. There was nobody to talk to that would have the grounded information. There was nobody who was going to be able to pull all these disparate elements together.
When someone dies, one of the harbingers of things to come is how the funeral went. Sometimes people argue over the words in the obituary, where the funeral service is going to be held. Should the person be buried in a casket or should they be cremated? Jerry Garcia's estate, unfortunately, was no different.
Jerry Garcia is laid to rest in a private funeral at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Belvedere, California, in a ceremony that many would say proceeds beautifully. That is, those who are permitted to attend.
The memorial service, funeral service for him was closely controlled. It had been kept a secret as to where the location was, and at the door there were people that kept you out or let you in depending upon who you were. And Deborah had, as Jerry's wife, had decided that she did not want Carolyn Adams to be there.
Ex-wife Mountain Girl was kept off of the guest list.
Deborah Coons has been very jealous of her position in Jerry's life. Mountain Girl was the recognized wife. Mountain Girl was the mother of the daughters. Mountain Girl was the one that everybody knew. Mountain Girl was the one he was living with when Deborah met Jerry.
Widow Deborah Coons also prevents Adams from boarding the boat that will spread Garcia's ashes in San Francisco Bay.
So the harbinger of things to come emerged by virtue of Deborah Coons saying, no, you can't board the boat. You can't be part of the process of spreading Jerry's ashes. Once that happens, the gloves come off.
I'm not leaving until I see her, okay?
Mountain Girl stood on the dock yelling at the top of her voice. Remember I said she was no shrinking violet. This is family. Those are my daughters. This is family.
It's my family.
Mountain Girl is one of the most solid characters I've ever known.
They had 2 children, and she was a meaningful part of his life for many, many years. Perhaps the longest relationship that Jerry Garcia had with a woman that he loved was, in fact, with Mountain Girl.
Jerry cared for her a lot. That's why he married her towards the end of his career, was so that he made sure that she was taken care of financially. That's my understanding.
When they separate in 1993, together they write a divorce agreement without the use of lawyers, in which Jerry agrees to pay Adams $5 million over a period of several years.
At the time that Jerry and Carolyn Adams reached their agreement, they came out of the conference room, told me what it was, and I did comment that I thought that was an awful lot of money for Jerry to agree to be paying to her. But that is something that Jerry felt was appropriate, and so that was the way it stood.
When Garcia dies, however, payments to Carolyn Adams cease unexpectedly.
Deborah Coons felt that that was not an appropriate agreement, that it was way too much, and one of the issues that Deborah Coons did raise was Jerry's mental state at that point in time, and whether or not he had known really what he was doing or had capacity really to come into that agreement.
I do think that her reason for contesting the agreement and setting aside the agreement was based more on personal animosity and her conflicted position as it was whether or not the agreement was really binding. Deborah Coons not only was co-executrix of Jerry Garcia's estate, she was also a beneficiary. Her interest is what's called a remainder interest. That is, after the payment of debts and expenses, support payments, she was to participate in the residuary of his estate equal to 1/3. So clearly, the larger the estate, the more her interest would increase.
On October 17, 1995, 2 months after Garcia's death, Mountain Girl sues the estate for the rest of her money.
Mountain Girl was put in an odd position because Deborah Coons, in seeking to set aside the note, included in her submissions an allegation that the marriage was a tax sham, that it wasn't a real marriage. So it put Mountain Girl in the position of trying to disprove that by showing that it was a real marriage, and part of that was her showing love letters.
In her very public courtroom battle against Garcia's widow, Adams reads a letter she claims Garcia wrote in the 1980s. The letter is meant to prove Jerry's lasting love for Adams, contrary to Coons' claim that Garcia's love for Adams was short-lived, and he only married Adams for tax benefits.
The court case was a calamity in the Grateful Dead world. These people had spent their lives keeping their mouths shut, keeping their soiled linen private, and not speaking in public ill of any member. It was an important part of the code of the Grateful Dead. And here's Deborah causing all this trouble and creating this law case rather than just writing the check, which would have been the Grateful Dead way.
But the letter is not exactly what it seems. To the surprise of the courtroom, Kuhn's lawyers established through an offhand reference made in the text that the letter was written before 1976 and not in the 1980s when Adams says she received it. This does not make it a win for Kuhn's, however.
Mountain Girl was excluded, and it was not received well by the Dead community. And this demonstrated this divisiveness, if you will, this exclusivity that seemed counter to the whole Grateful Dead scene.
Ultimately, the court determines Garcia and Adams did have a long-lasting, loving relationship.
We considered Mountain Girl to be one of our own in the Grateful Dead scene. She was. I mean, she was there at the very beginning, and she continued to be a member of the scene and continued to influence it, and she had Jerry's kids after all.
Deborah Kuntz was such a brief episode in Jerry's life. They were married very shortly after he ran into her a second time, much later in life, and she was married to him for a year and change when he died. That's no time at all in the Grateful Dead world. There were people that had worked with Jerry for 35 years that she didn't know their names and they didn't know who she was.
In 1998, Carolyn Adams settles for a lump sum of $1.25 million, and the court officially recognizes her as being a legitimate wife of Jerry Garcia. But the battles are not over. In the months to follow, even more claimants crawl out of the woodwork. For Kuhn's, suddenly it seems as though the celebrated musician struck deals with far more than just his ex-wife and significant others. Former employees, acquaintances, and friends also come forward to claim their share of the pot. On September 2, 1998, longtime office manager for the Grateful Dead, Suzanne Stevens, files a claim against the estate. Stevens argued she helped secure the royalties to the Ben & Jerry's ice cream flavor in Garcia's name, Cherry Garcia, and for her efforts, Garcia made her a promise. If her position working for the Grateful Dead was ever terminated, she would be compensated by a percentage of the ice cream royalties.
Suzanne Stevens had noticed that Ben & Jerry's ice cream had a flavor called Cherry Garcia. So she claims that she spoke to Jerry Garcia about it, and he authorized her to reach out to the folks at Ben & Jerry's and say to them there should be an agreement with Jerry Garcia where he's to get a percentage of sales.
Annual royalties for the ice cream flavor come steadily in around $400,000. According to Ben & Jerry's, Garcia did give them his permission to use his name. The frontman's legendary reply being, "As long as they don't name a motor oil after me." But the ice cream company never entered into a formal licensing agreement with Garcia for the use of his name.
It was their #1 seller, so they did indeed reach an agreement that Jerry Garcia would be paid a percentage of the ice cream sales.
For Stevens, who was part of the Grateful Dead organization for many years, the deal she had with Garcia was meant to be a kind of severance agreement.
Both the executors were very surprised when Suzanne Stevens raised this issue about the claim for half of the royalties on Ben & Jerry's. It had never been brought up before. It did come out of nowhere, and that was a good part of the reason why we rejected it. There was no substantiation at all for that claim.
When the case is finally settled, Suzanne Stevens accepts an undisclosed amount for her part in securing rights to Cherry Garcia ice cream. But the claims don't stop there.
There was one lady who claimed she was owed millions of dollars and she'd actually been married to Jerry. Unfortunately, none of that was true, and she did have some mental problems.
But a more credible claim comes as one of Garcia's former partners arrives on the scene with her own bone to pick with the estate.
He and Menashe had been negotiating a formal trust agreement to hold the house.
No lawyers, no accountants. This was just an oral agreement, but Jerry lived by it.
Free spirit and Grateful Dead legend Jerry Garcia dies, leaving behind an assortment of IOUs to ex-lovers and partners. Free love has ended up costing Garcia a lot.
When Jerry Garcia performed at his concerts, one of the things that he liked doing was looking at the audience and feeling energy. And he thought if he felt someone who had good energy, he could lock into that person during the concert to help alleviate his nerves. One of the people that he locked in on their vibe was Menashe Matherson, who was a real Deadhead. She did follow the Grateful Dead band around.
Matheson, a college graduate and holistic healer, first meets Garcia in 1978 at a Grateful Dead concert.
She did something interesting during one of the shows, was she cut off her long, beautiful hair during the concert, which certainly caught Jerry's eye.
The two don't develop a relationship immediately, but they decide to keep in touch, hoping to eventually get together. That time comes under unexpected conditions.
When Jerry went into the coma in 1986, there was an outpouring of support from the whole Deadhead community. We loved Jerry. We would have done anything for him. There were offers of kidneys and livers, whatever it took to restore him to health. We're passionate. We wanted to go on forever.
Almost a decade after their first encounter, Garcia asks Matheson to help him recover.
Now, Menashe is the Earth Mother. She's like, a hippie stereotype out of an R. Crumb comic, and a good-hearted gal.
In 1987, the two fall in love and move in together, even though Garcia is still married to Mountain Girl. Daughter Keelan Noel Garcia is born that December.
Menashe and Jerry Garcia loved each other. They decided to have a child. And when they did have that child, Keelan, they were living together as husband and wife. Jerry Garcia changed diapers and held the baby and really bonded with Keelan.
Garcia and Matheson even talk of getting married. But the wedding never happens. For one, Garcia's divorce has not yet been finalized. And two, there is another woman on the horizon. And Jerry is ready to move on.
When Jerry's relationship stopped with somebody, if it was at least a personal relationship, then he felt that it was appropriate that as best as possible things went smoothly and amicably, and that people were well received and taken care of as best as could be done.
Jerry leaves, but still true to his generous and peacekeeping spirit, he sets up a financial agreement with Menashe and Keelan.
He and Menashe had been negotiating a formal trust agreement to hold the house for Keelan's benefit, and that never got concluded prior to his death. Deborah Coons felt that the amount of support needed to be appropriate, as well as I felt the same way. We got analysis based on a budget of what Menashe needed in terms of monthly money, and the court approved that as a reasonable amount of money, and we moved forward from there.
Coons reduces the payments.
Deborah Coons and the co-executors took the position that those payments were not in writing, that there was no court order to make such payments, and the payments were drastically reduced. Menashe Matherson took the position ultimately that she said, I've taken an 85% pay cut in the amount of wealth that I'm now getting from the estate, and I'm financially in bad shape. She had to borrow money from friends and relatives, and she was living hand to mouth. Now, you could say, well, she should have had an agreement. Perhaps that's true, but it goes back to the way Jerry was: peace, love, spontaneity, lack of rigidity, and not using lawyers and accountants. And in this case, it turned out to hurt him and Menashe and Keelan.
With 2 claims from former partners already pending, the battle for Garcia's estate is only about to get worse. When the real person behind him leaving Matheson comes forward for her piece of the pie, her name is Barbara Meyer.
Barbara Meyer had been a former girlfriend of Jerry's, and they had had a serious relationship.
It's California, 1960s. Jerry Garcia meets Barbara Meyer in Menlo Park while the 2 are students.
Barbara Meyer, who apparently was a high school sweetheart of his, she was into poetry. Jerry was a big fan of her poetry. He thought she was beautiful and had a good spirit.
Soon, Barbara and Jerry become inseparable. Meyer also supports Garcia financially in these early days as an aspiring musician. She buys him his first 12-string guitar. But their relationship doesn't last, and by 1962, the 2 have split. In the 1990s, the unexpected happens and the old lovers meet again after a friend gives Garcia a copy of Meyer's latest book of poetry. Despite the fact Jerry is still technically with Menashe Matheson and isn't even divorced from Mountain Girl, the old lovers decide to vacation in Hawaii together, and it looks to everyone like Jerry's health has returned.
Though they were separated or didn't see each other for many years, later on in life, in fact, shortly before he married Deborah Coons, he was going to marry Barbara Meyer, and they were actually planning a wedding.
But Garcia's drug use is too much for Barbara.
He was a heroin addict. He had, in the past, lapsed into a diabetes coma for 5 days. He was overeating. He was smoking cigarettes. And he had signs of illness that he was treating with acupuncture because he really didn't want to go to hospitals.
When Meyer confronts Garcia about his drug use, the rocker ends the relationship.
As part of their quote-unquote breakup, apparently she pointed out to him that there were certain financial needs and obligations that she had. When Jerry asked her how much, she said around $59,000, and he said, fine, I'll double it, $108,000.
Although he ends the relationship, he arranges for Barbara to have financial compensation for the sacrifices she made to be with him, a total of $108,000. But just as they did for Mountain Girl, Meyer's payments stop suddenly once Garcia is gone, and Deborah Coons doesn't stop there.
Around the Grateful Dead circles, they call Deborah the Black Widow.
The Grateful Dead production said, wait a minute, those aren't Jerry's guitars to begin with. Those are the band's guitars.
Jerry Garcia dies, leaving behind an estate estimated at $18 million. But as it goes to probate, millions of dollars in claims surface against what the free-loving rock icon leaves behind. One of his lovers, Barbara Meyer, is battling with the estate for compensation she says Jerry promised to her.
The claim by Barbara Myers did not have any prior written agreement. There were documents going back and forth and discussions, but nothing had been formalized at that point before he died.
There was only $21,000 left on that obligation when he died, but the estate stopped making them. And Coons took the position that there was no legally enforceable document, and therefore she wasn't, as co-executrix, going to make the payments, and she didn't. So Barbara Meyer sued. Now, here it is again, no lawyers, no accountants, hippie culture, revolution that they were a part of. This was just an oral agreement, but Jerry lived by it. and he had made his payments, and there's only $21,000 due. So Barbara Meyer was just one person whose payments stopped right after Jerry died.
Deborah was outside of that culture, that Grateful Dead culture. She had showed up very recently, and she didn't understand the rules, and she wasn't going to play the game. So this is some kind of blood feud on the part of Deborah Coons. Around the Grateful Dead circles, they call Deborah the Black Widow.
Deadheads blame Deborah Coons for tarnishing Garcia's free-loving, free-living legacy.
If Jerry were watching Beyond the Grave, he'd be laughing and laughing and laughing. Money didn't matter. The music mattered. The brotherhood mattered. The love mattered. Those were the things that counted to Jerry Garcia.
I'm sure she's a good person. I'm sure she tried to do the right thing by the estate. But when you have someone who's so conflicted, so emotionally charged as wife number 3, seeking to enforce a will that provides for children from prior marriages, ex-wife number 2, payments due to prior girlfriends, there's just too much animosity, there's too much angst, there's too much in the way of mental anguish to expect that one can act without emotion.
Finally, after years of litigation, ex-partner Menashe Matheson comes to a private settlement with the court, and Barbara Meyer is paid the remaining $21,000 she is owed under her agreement with Garcia. But still, the fighting continues. The band itself ends up heading into a sticky courtroom battle with guitar maker Douglas Irwin over a specification in Garcia's will.
Jerry Garcia, in his will, left his guitars to their maker, Douglas Irwin. And these guitars had names. For example, Rosebud, the Tiger.
The guitars were very special. Jerry didn't own a lot of guitars. You know, a guy like Steve Miller has 700 guitars. Jerry had one guitar that he played and one guitar in case that guitar got broken.
The guitars, all named, are considered by the band members and fans as part of the Grateful Dead family.
It seemed to be a nice token. You know, for someone to say, I give you this guitar, or I give you this ring, it's nice because it's something that you could really remember the person by. And to Douglas Irwin, I'm sure Jerry thought he would really appreciate getting the guitars back that he made.
The dispute based upon who really owned the guitars. Jerry could, under his will, only give away what he owned at the time he died.
Both the band members and Irwin feel they have the best claim to the guitars.
What was supposed to be a nice gesture wound up to be litigation for years. Why? Number one, because the Grateful Dead production said, wait a minute, those aren't Jerry's guitars to begin with. Those are the band's guitars. The band paid for these guitars. So Jerry had no right to bequeath them to someone else.
While guitar maker Douglas Irwin receives 2 of his guitars, the Tiger and the Wolf, Irwin sells the guitars at an auction for $1.74 million.
It was a slam dunk case. The band lost. Irwin was given the guitars. He sold them both at auction. Both of them brought more than $1 million. The owner of the Indiana Colts bought one of them. He keeps it in his basement and, you know, plays on Wednesday afternoons with his buddies with Jerry's guitar. I mean,
a lot of people felt that they should have been put into a museum or the Music Hall of Fame or kept by the Grateful Dead or somebody because they did have some historical value in relation to Jerry and the Grateful Dead. But the will provided otherwise, and that was Jerry's intent.
This was another example at the end there where things hadn't been planned out very well in my mind and led to this disappointment, I would say, in the Deadhead community. Let's stop the fighting. That's just not who we are. And we thought that the organization wasn't like that either.
In the end, more than $1 million have been spent on legal fees. According to Hellman, eventually the claims were all resolved.
The executors for Jerry tried in every instance to settle every matter one way or another, and by settlement doesn't mean that much was paid, if anything was paid, but just that a resolution was reached with the person filing the creditor's claim.
If Deborah Coons, as co-executor, had honored the equitable distribution agreements, she could have probably reduced the legal fee significantly and saved the estate money. But more importantly, she probably could have continued what Jerry would have wanted, I think, is in the spirit of kindness and cooperation and trying to help people. The administration of his estate could have been less litigious.
Was, in the long run, after Jerry died, was everything settled and peaceful and people satisfied? No. Nobody was satisfied. The band has never been satisfied. Everybody has been at each other's throats. All the women, all the workers, all the people that were loyal to this group for so many years, nobody got what they wanted.
But for Deadheads, the music and the scene around the Grateful Dead are much stronger memories than the court battles ever will be. Jerry Garcia will be remembered as the face behind the band who got people dancing, the teddy bear who painted the sky in psychedelic light.
When all said and done, the other musicians in the band related to each other more through Jerry than to one another, you know. He just was that sort of guy. He had the best ideas and had the quickest mind, and he was surrounded by other very, very smart people, but he just was the natural center of that world.
To me, Jerry Garcia represented the 60s. At least a revolution of young people who believed in kindness and peace and generosity, attending concerts like Woodstock, protesting the Vietnam War, experimenting with drugs, experimenting with sex, experimenting with music. He was, perhaps not intending to be, but became symbolic of that era.
The Grateful Dead were one of the few rock bands that actually stood for something. They approached their life and their work with a set of principles, and as long as Jerry was alive, they adhered to those principles. As a result, they were able to do things that other rock bands would never have been able to do. And they achieved a relationship with an audience that is unparalleled by other rock bands.
I lost a lifestyle when the Grateful Dead stopped touring, absolutely. I lost this iconic figure, this magnetic, charismatic, wonderful leader of the Grateful Dead, Jerry Garcia. Once a Deadhead, always a Deadhead. Yeah, I think that's probably true. It's certainly true for me. I'm just as passionate today as I ever was.
James Brown, the godfather of soul, dies and leaves behind an incredible 50-year musical legacy.
There would be no Prince, there would be no Michael Jackson without what James Brown did on stage.
He's like lightning in a bottle. You know, he'd dance across the stage, lackady hairdos, the shiny shoes, just amazing talent. And I think one that anyone who saw him, he was a showstopper, you know?
But the entertainer leaves his family with next to nothing.
With his voice very elevated, Mr. Dallas, they are not gonna ride my back when I'm gone. Do you hear me?
It drives a stake into the Brown family, pitting his loved ones against one another.
In the late 90s, my grandfather was sued. Not by some record company, not by his trustees, but by his children.
Christmas Day 2006. Funk music superstar James Brown dies in an Atlanta hospital of congestive heart failure after a bout of pneumonia. He is 73 years old. Just 2 days earlier, James Brown is on his way to the hospital at the request of his dentist, who thinks he's too sick to undergo routine dental implant work. In the days before his death, Brown's son Daryl has urged him to slow down and take better care of himself.
You gotta get your health together, man. You gotta get yourself together. You know, you ain't no spring chicken, you know, and everything. And we talked for a long time. He said, "Thank you, son." He said, "Thank you for talking to me like that."
Brown's daughter Yama is in Atlanta, preparing to celebrate Christmas with her children.
My dad hated hospitals. He did not want to go. He fought tooth and nail about going.
Brown stays overnight for observation, but by December 24th, his condition is no better.
He was real sick, man. I could hear it in his voice. He's very shortness of breath. And you can hear the ammonia. You can hear the breaking up real bad.
I called him the day before and I said, "Look, I'm coming to see you." And he's like, "Nah, don't come." And I said, "Well, tomorrow's Christmas." And I said, "So if you're still in the hospital, I'm coming to see you on Christmas."
Brown's wife, backup singer Tommy Ray Heiny, is on the West Coast. She and her son James Jr. are on their way home to South Carolina to be with Brown for Christmas. She has no idea that time is running out. Albert Buddy Dallas is Brown's lawyer of 24 years and one of his closest advisors.
It was 1:20 in the morning, Christmas morning. I received a call from Mr. Charles Bobbitt. Mr. Bobbitt was a long-time road manager, personal assistant to Mr. Brown, was with Mr. Brown when he passed. And it was the voice of Mr. Bobbitt saying simply, "Mr. Dallas, he's gone."
And I just screamed. I couldn't even, what do you mean? I couldn't say anything. I couldn't believe it.
And it's like when JFK was killed, when Dr. King was shot, we all kind of remember where we were and what we were doing. And, you know, this is the way it affected me and so many others.
I went from grieving literally for about maybe 15, 20 minutes to getting thrust into, now you gotta get everything together.
It's kind of like you'd like to be able to press the rewind button, you know, go back to a time that had not occurred, but that's not reality.
R.J. Smith covered Brown's life and music in his biography, The One.
It wasn't a Christmas anymore. It was a sad day. And I listened to a lot of his music that day.
He was the greatest, just like they say he was. You know, I mean, as a musician, I'm not saying it because I'm son, but I'm saying it because as a musician and what he's done for the music, what he's done for music, American music, rhythm and blues, soul, funk. He's the creator of funk.
Grandson William James Brown remembers the godfather of soul.
He's like lightning in a bottle. You know, he'd dance across the stage, the lackady hairdos, the shiny shoes, just an amazing talent. And I think one that anyone who saw him, he was a showstopper, you know?
While Brown's family and friends are in mourning, Albert Dallas steps into his role as trustee of his late client's estate.
I was named as trustee and personal representative along with two others, Judge Al Bradley, who was a magistrate judge there in Aiken, South Carolina, and who was road manager with Mr. Brown from 1991 until 2002. David Cannon was Mr. Brown's financial man in the organization.
Within hours, Cannon approaches Yama Brown about some of her father's business affairs.
He's like, "Well, we got this movie deal we gotta close. You know, your dad didn't get a chance to sign this. We've got some other things we're working on. We really need to get together and talk about how this is gonna go forward."
Immediately, she suspects that something's not right.
I said, "No, what we really need to do is figure out his funeral. You're talking about business, and he hasn't even been dead 2 hours." It was ridiculous.
Brown's spouse, Tommy Ray, returns to the mansion, the home she shared with Brown for the past 10 years, and is shocked to find it off limits. Her strained relationship with Brown's adult children leads her to assume they are behind this.
We told her several times, we are not responsible. First of all, we're not the trustees. We don't have the ability to close the doors, lock the doors. We don't even have keys.
Brown's children aren't the only ones who are on the outs with Tommy Ray Heiny.
And I secured it. I have no apology for securing it. In fact, had I not done that, I'm sure I would have been sued for not doing my job.
Dallas's decision apparently stems from a long-standing friction between Tommy Ray Heiny and the three trustees, who question the very legitimacy of her relationship to the much older Brown.
There was a lot of controversy around her because she came so late in his life and there was so many years difference.
There are 36 years between the two.
When he met her, she was in Vegas. She was not exactly the type of woman that you would bring home to your mother.
January 2007, as tempers die down over the new year, Yama and Daryl and their 4 adult siblings, Terry, Larry, Venetia, and Deanna, gather for the reading of the will along with Tommy Ray, but they're all in for a shock.
He left to 6 named children my household personal effects.
The children are to receive nothing else.
There are certain things that he wouldn't do, and one thing he wouldn't do is ever cut his family out of things. And when I say that, I don't mean financially, and most people think that's what I mean. I'm talking about making decisions about his future.
Was I surprised when the reading of the will? No. No. Surprised by what? James Brown did what he wanted to do, man. Nobody make him do that.
Brown allocates a part of his estate to the Brown Family Education Trust for his grandchildren's educations. The rest go to Brown's pet charity, the I Feel Good Trust.
He then left a provision that says, everything else on the planet, I leave to needy and underprivileged children to be educated in institutions in the states of Georgia and South Carolina.
Everything else on the planet is Brown's house and the royalties from his music, estimated to be worth at least $20 million. According to Albert Dallas, Brown knew what he was doing when he first thought up the I Feel Good Trust for needy children in 1987.
I said, Mr. Brown, I'm just fascinated by your announcement of leaving everything to the I Feel Good Children's Trust, needy and underprivileged children. I said, it's just awesome that you plan to do this. But do you mind telling me what you plan to do for your children in a cat-like manner? He literally came down right in front of me with his finger in my face, with his voice very elevated. Mr. Dallas, they are not gonna ride my back when I'm gone. Do you hear me?
Yama Brown denies her father would ever make such a statement.
He never made any indications like, I'm gonna cut you guys out of the will and I'm giving it to somebody else because I just don't love you.
The will also makes no provisions for Tommy Ray Heiny or James Brown Jr.
Tommy Ray came forward. That was not a good time for everybody. You know, it was just like, I'm the wife. I get to say this, get to say that. And of course, the trustees were saying, you're not even in the will.
He did what he wanted. That was James Brown. He did it his way.
To leave out his wife, to leave out his child, I don't know.
The will sparks an immediate debate over Brown's last wishes. His grandson, William James, defends the will from the get-go.
A lot of needs have come about in this legal process since he's passed away. A lot of needs, I might say, that run contradictory to the needs of James Brown, who only had a need to educate children.
Giving hope to children comes naturally to Brown, who grew up without it on the main streets of Augusta, Georgia.
He lived in a neighborhood called the Terry. They called it the Terry because it stood for the Negro territory.
The only place they could stay was an aunt that he had. Honeybell, she ran a prostitution home.
He saw a lot of things at a really, really young age that I can't even imagine.
Learned to sing and dance for nickels, dimes, and quarters. I think he supplemented that income with the theft of some hubcaps along the way.
Before long, Brown has a setback that will really leave him singing the blues.
You could knock him down, but incredibly, he'd get back up again. It's just the mentality of James Brown.
James Brown's family is shocked to learn that the majority of the musician's estate will not go to them. Instead, it will go towards the education of needy children. James Joseph Brown is born into poverty on May 3, 1933, the son of farmer Joseph Brown and his wife Susie.
My grandfather was born in Barnwell, South Carolina, in the middle of a shack out in the middle of the woods.
You know, dirt poor, playing in the woods, making beats and sounds in the woods.
His mother, Susie, leaves young James and his father Joseph for another man when James is still a toddler.
Unfortunately, my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather had some issues that were not always the best of sorts.
The future soul superstar comes to see his mother's early departure as more of a betrayal than the regular beatings he endures from his father.
The only place they could stay was an aunt that he had. Honeybell, she ran a prostitution home. And for many years, my grandfather had to sleep in a prostitution bed. And of course, when the ladies needed work, he'd have to give up that bed.
So he saw a lot of things at a really, really young age that I can't even imagine. I have kids of my own, so I can't even imagine them growing up like that.
School takes a back seat to a more basic need, survival. Brown hits the streets of Augusta and earns his first few dollars as a performer.
Augusta was a big city, and Augusta was a tough city.
Learned to sing and dance for nickels, dimes, and quarters. I think he supplemented that income with the theft of some hubcaps along the way.
So there's not much you can do with a sixth grade education back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But the one thing he did have was talent. So he was, focused on, I've got a talent, I need to discipline myself to grow my talent.
His education was from the University of Hard Knocks and from Survival University.
It's this lack of education that leads Brown, decades later, to devise the I Feel Good Trust.
The intention of that trust was to educate children, young poor children. And he specifically didn't want color. He thought that we'd gone through that too many times for far too long. And that what we really needed to do was focus on helping every child that's poor get an education, because that's the only way that you're going to get an education.
Brown doesn't have a team of advisors when he is arrested for stealing clothes at age 16. He quickly learns firsthand the difficulties of being a young black man incarcerated in the South.
Mr. Brown was always a survivor. You could knock him down, but incredibly, he'd get back up again. It's just the mentality of James Brown.
Here's a man who grows up from nothing in a prostitution home. And he goes from a prostitution home to the White House. And talent takes you there. Hard work takes you there. Every child can relate to that in this country, to start from nothing and become everything. He is what we teach every child to be every day.
And there's something about music, man. I don't care how bad things are in your life. When you hit that note and you play that music, everything goes away.
In his third year of juvenile detention, while playing baseball against a local team, he meets civilian Bobby Bird. The two become fast friends. When Brown is released from prison in the early 1950s, Bird invites Brown to sing in his band, the Famous Flames. Gospel music will be Brown's salvation.
Bobby Bird was a very loyal sideman to James Brown throughout his career. A lot of people know him as the godfather of the Godfather, in a sense. He really looked after him and was really there from the start.
Brown has his first hit with the Famous Flames in 1955. Please, Please, Please sells over 1 million copies. Brown assimilates all of his musical influences and invents his own sound.
There's all these moving parts going in and out. There's a lot of tension created between the drums and the bass, how they're together and apart at the same time. It creates this sort of anticipation that makes us feel a certain energy, that makes us dance.
And of course, my grandfather being boisterous and someone who, was in your face a little bit. It wasn't long thereafter he was released that people knew this man can sing, James can sing. And he started singing with Bobby in the choir. And it wasn't too long after he started singing, he wanted to be up front.
And he was so at peace, it was just his comfort zone. He loved the stage. And I believe that's what kept him alive for so long.
He had a little pep in his step. He had style, he had charisma. He had that thing that makes you want to look at him and watch him do his thing on the stage.
As a physical performer, it's really tough to match James Brown. He was incredibly influential. There would be no Prince, there would be no Michael Jackson without what James Brown did on stage. I'm not even talking about music, I'm talking about the way this guy moved his body.
Brown's popularity eventually supersedes the other band members, and he becomes the main attraction. His 1962 recording of Night Train reaches Billboard's top 40, and his constant touring and several business ventures earn him several nicknames.
It's the godfather of soul, the hardest working man in show business, Butane James, the new minister of the super heavy funk. He was a big fella.
Brown appears in the 1964 concert movie The Tammy Show and upstages the headliners, the Rolling Stones.
If you had the privilege of going to a concert, you saw a man really give everything he had.
He was a born performer, and the thing that was amazing about him is he just exuded this tremendous amount of energy, but he kept it very tightly controlled on stage.
That control includes keeping a tight rein on his musicians as well.
You had to show up to the show looking proper, you had to be dressed properly, every detail had to be in its perfect place, and then he would just go on stage and explode out of these really tight sort of situations.
When you would see him spin around and point his finger at a member of the band, it just cost that band member $50 because he was slightly late or off-key.
Darrell Brown played lead guitar in his father's band for many years.
And he had a thing, you know, where he flick his hands, and that's $5, $10, $15, $20, $25, $50. I got fined one time, man. It's funny, and he never took the money, but it was just, it was still a lesson, you know, because I knew what I had did. I knew exactly what I did. I'm not telling, but I knew what I did, and it was like, and I was like, God.
I don't think I've ever seen anyone move their feet as fast as James Brown could move his. And he says, well, Mr. Dallas, you know, when you're out there on the Chitlin circuit and you're coming through Louisiana and the sheriff decides that he wants to see you dance and he starts firing bullets at your feet, he says, Mr. Dallas, you can move them really, really fast.
As the civil rights movement gets underway, James Brown's music in many ways becomes the soundtrack for the struggle.
Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. That sort of became a rally cry. These are lyrics that became a rally cry for the Black Power movement and for black pride and black identity in general.
I think at that time he recognized who he was and what he had to offer in terms of the love, the ability to speak to his people, the ability to transcend, again, race and color and creed, to speak to the voice, the frustrations of a generation of people.
I will keep on going. I will, you know, say what I need to say. It's gonna be unpopular, but I'm gonna do it anyway because I just feel like it's the right thing to do, and I feel like I need to pull up my people in the process and just make them feel proud of who they are.
The 1970s are a peak period for Brown, with hits like Get Up and Get Up Off of That Thing, but he's later knocked off the charts by the disco movement of the late 70s.
Disco was not about sweatiness and rawness. It was a little more glossy and a little smoother. It was about new stars, not old stars that we already knew.
By the early 1980s, Brown's fortune is nearly depleted.
It was tough for him because he wasn't kind of at the top like, you know, he was before.
Now, on the verge of bankruptcy, the hardest working man in show business can't get a job. Enter lawyer Albert Buddy Dallas.
The banks really didn't want any of his business. He really was not a very popular figure in 1984. Mr. Brown and I developed quickly a personal friendship in addition to our professional relationship.
My grandfather was going through the IRS, coming in to try to take his possessions and his assets in a time when no one would deal with my grandfather. Banks, financial institutions. He was at the very bottom of his luck at this time. Buddy Dallas came in, took him on as a client, paid his bills up to a point where he could just get them back to zero.
They were impounding vehicles he owned and other things. I think he was in danger of losing a house he really loved on Beach Island in South Carolina. And Buddy Dallas bought the house for him and turned it over to James Brown.
It was kind of hard times. I mean, there was very little money, and many times I would have to cover expenses myself. But I did that in 1984 and 85 when we were trying to resurrect things. I was the only source of credit because Mr. Brown didn't have any.
With Dallas's help, Brown manages to turn things around and enjoys a resurgence with the hit single Living in America and several movie and TV appearances. But Brown's newfound popularity makes him a target for those wishing to profit from him. Some suspect that Tommy Ray Heiny tried to take advantage of James Brown from day one.
Everybody figured she was a gold digger and she was after his money, and she could have been, she could have been after his money.
And then there's some shocking news.
The child produced through the supposed marriage could not have been his child.
Mr. Brown was totally humiliated by the developments with Miss Ray.
She refused to come see this man on his deathbed and decided rather to stay in Las Vegas and have her a good time.
Before his death, James Brown decides to leave much of the wealth he's accumulated over his 50-year career towards the education of needy boys and girls, leaving his children and spouse out in the cold. 1994, Tommy Ray Heiny is 25 when she auditions to be a backup singer for Brown, who is 36 years her senior. Within 3 months, they are a couple.
I don't know what her initial intentions were, but I'm sure he afforded her a different lifestyle than she never had, so most people would have probably went for it. You have James Brown interested in you, and you're gonna go for it.
Tommy Ray gives birth to a boy in June of 2001. Brown is elated at the prospect of a half-black, half-white son and names him James Brown Jr. The couple are married later that year.
He fell in love with her. That's the woman he wanted to be with.
But on Christmas Day 2006, newly widowed Tommy Ray can't believe what is happening to her.
Why would you lock Tommy Ray out? Hell, Tommy Ray had been gone since October. She was not a resident of the mansion anymore. She had no right to be there after Mr. Brown left us.
Everybody figured she was a gold digger and she was after his money, and she could have been, she could have been after his money.
The trustees turn Tommy Ray away because they claim her marriage to Brown is not valid. The claim opens up a can of worms from Tommy Ray's past.
Tommy Ray claims to be the spouse of Mr. Brown. We all know that Miss Ray was married to another man at the time that she engaged in a ceremonial marriage to Mr. Brown.
Years before his death, Brown is shocked to learn that Tommy Ray is already married. In 1997, she had wed a Pakistani immigrant in an alleged green card fraud. The union is only annulled in 2004, long after the couple's 2001 wedding. Under South Carolina law, this renders her marriage to Brown null and void.
Mr. Brown was totally humiliated by the developments. Miss Ray sought an annulment. There were agreements between Miss Ray and Mr. Brown's counsel that she would never, ever seek to claim a common law relationship with Mr. Brown.
I think he tried to make her into the type of woman she ought to be. I just think he failed at it.
James Brown is free to remarry Tommy Ray Heiny after her previous marriage is annulled, but he never does. And to many in Brown's circle, the marriage controversy is just the tip of the iceberg.
The child produced through the supposed marriage could not have been his child, for the simple fact we now know that my grandfather had many procedures done that would not have allowed him to have a child.
According to Albert Dallas, Tommy Ray Heiny's son is born nearly 2 decades after Brown undergoes an irreversible vasectomy. Brown and Tommy Ray Heiny are nowhere near each other during the 10 months prior to the birth of James Jr. To Dallas, it boils down to a simple question of geographical impossibility.
Mr. Brown's over on the East Coast, and she's in Vegas or LA during that period of time.
Depending on who you talk to, DNA testing of James Brown Jr. is either kept private or it never happens at all. His paternity remains unresolved to this day. Meanwhile, a legal battle is brewing over the I Feel Good Trust, which ignores the interests of Brown's spouse and children in favor of children he doesn't even know.
When I look at his will, I think about, gosh, how did he ever, I mean, how could he have signed this without being properly advised?
Albert Dallas is quick to respond to this.
Anyone who could make such a statement as that obviously did not know Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown was a person that would influence you, but I absolutely assure you, you were not going to influence Mr. Brown.
Nobody's there pulling your damn arm. Okay, nobody's there telling you, no, don't put that there, don't do that.
When your lawyer tells you one thing, and that's your friend, you believe it. And he didn't look at all those contracts, he signed them.
Trust and estate lawyer James M. Kane shares his take on it.
I'm not suggesting James Brown didn't read his document, I don't know. But even clients who read the documents closely will not have the recall ability generally to tell you what all these various provisions are.
Dad never got higher than a 7th grade education, and he felt like that stifled him in the sense because he didn't know a lot of things about contracts.
But Brown did know a thing or two about Tommy Ray Heiny, according to his grandson, William James.
The fact she refused to come see this man on his deathbed and decided rather to stay in Las Vegas and have her a good time, gave him all the knowledge about this woman he needed to know, such that in his last hours he would request of my father, don't let this woman come around, do not let this woman close to anything that makes James Brown who James Brown is.
Nevertheless, on February 1st, 2007, Tommy Ray files a petition asserting that she is Brown's rightful widow and has a 2001 marriage certificate to prove it.
Miss Ray has proceeded as if she was Mr. Brown's spouse. Mr. Brown never remarried Miss Ray, even in the face of numerous requests by Miss Ray that he remarry her.
She also claims that the August 2000 will used to determine the division of the estate is not the most current one, and that Brown often had the tendency to change it according to his temperament. Albert Dallas stands by his client's recognized will.
Mr. Brown's documents speak for themselves. Did he devise or not? And the answer is he did. Are we not then duty-bound, obligated to enforce his wishes in a court of law? I think we are.
The accusations continue to fly, and before long, allegations emerge that James Brown may have been duped by his closest advisors.
Within the course of 2.5 years, that money went from about $25 million down to zero.
While years before his death, Brown himself is named in a lawsuit filed by his own children.
Mr. Brown said to me, they don't know what that's cost them.
James Brown dies and makes little to no provisions for his family. While widow Tommy Ray Heiny fights her own battles, children Yama and Deanna Brown suspect foul play on behalf of the estate's 3 trustees and decide to take matters into their own hands. January 2007, Albert Dallas and his fellow trustees are unable to present a complete portrait of Brown's financial status at the time of his death. To Yama Brown, it's just not good enough.
I don't know what else I could have done to have made everything transparent to the children.
On January 26th, less than 1 week after the reading of Brown's will, Yama and Deanna Brown's lawyer files an emergency petition for the termination of the estate's trustees.
We asked for their removal. That was one thing that we asked for after there was they couldn't account for certain things.
Dallas is shocked at the children's decision. He remembers Brown as someone who never mixed family with business.
One literally had to have an appointment to get in to see him, and that was true with the children. I mean, Mr. Brown was a very private man when he was not on the road. Fortunately, I was one of those that he allowed in that circle.
The children paint a complicated portrait of what it was like to grow up a Brown.
Picture your dad, okay, and then you having about 1 million brothers and sisters, you know, because we had to share them with the world. So picture that. Just imagine that way, and that's was James Brown, the dad.
I could hug him, you know, nestle in his chest, just like any daughter would do their father. But there was always that flip side when you got to be around James Brown, the entertainer, and then you had to share him with the rest of the world.
He wasn't there very often. You know, he was out trying to hone his talent, trying to be James Brown, trying to travel the Chitlin circuit in the South as it was. And he was not allowed really to spend too much time with his family and be James Brown at the same time.
My mom would always have to explain to us, you know, Dad's working, you know, he'll be back and things like that.
Relations between Brown and his children are put to the test when he's arrested in 1988 following a high-speed, drug-fueled car chase with the police. Brown is armed and is high on PCP, angel dust.
To me, it's amazing that he survived that car chase. So many police around him with shotguns, shooting out the tires of his car.
I don't know where they thought Mr. Brown would be going. I mean, everybody in the world knew who he was.
Brown serves just over 2 years in prison. His arrest causes a media frenzy.
As a child, it was difficult, and people don't really think about stuff like that. They don't think about how it affects his family, his wife, his kids, things like that.
No one knows exactly when he started smoking PCP. Some people say it might have been as early as the early 70s. A number of people say he smoked it on and off for the rest of his life.
We sometimes wonder, well, why do these artists and entertainers, you know, wind up with drugs or drug charges and so forth, trying to stay up to give a performance, and the grueling schedule they keep is probably the answer.
Him having a rough time with drugs, I always look at it as him having a rough time with himself, his demons. Okay, he was still human, man. He's just like anybody else, you know what I'm saying?
According to Yama Brown, her father's habit makes him susceptible to manipulation.
A lot of people took advantage of him during that time period because he was not thinking in his right mind and things like that.
Brown's last hit single, Living in America, drops in 1985. And by the time Brown is released from jail, money is tight again.
He had enormous amounts of debt from years on the road and traveling with, you know, entourages of dozens upon dozens of people.
In 1999, Brown takes out a $25 million bond as an advance against future royalty revenue. The bond is set up by his accountant and future trustee, David Cannon.
Within the course of 2.5 years, that money went from about $25 million down to zero.
Brown is unaware that Cannon receives a check from the fund for $5 million during this period and buys property in Honduras. This sets off alarm bells for Yama Brown.
That happened while he was still alive, and he didn't know it because he trusted him to do the right thing with his nest egg. God knows what they're going to do when you're gone and you're not here to defend yourself.
David Cannon didn't deceive anybody, says Albert Dallas.
Let me tell you something. Mr. Brown could go ghetto on you pretty damn quick. And to suggest that someone took Mr. Brown's money, I would say to them, Mr. Brown didn't know to the penny what he had, but he damn sure knew to the dollar.
Yama Brown's lawyer will later use Cannon's alleged wrongdoings as an argument to have him removed as a trustee. Meanwhile, William James Brown has an allegation of his own, this one against his aunts, Yama and Deanna Brown.
In the late 90s, my grandfather was sued. Not by some record company, not by his trustees, but by his children. He was sued by his children for songs they claimed they wrote.
In the mid-1970s, Brown creates a publishing company in the name of his daughters, Yama and Deanna, to manage the rights of certain songs.
Because he put the songs in our names, obviously when we were very young, he wanted us to have something, you know, to have something that was ours.
Not so, according to Brown's grandson.
My grandfather put these songs in their name to avoid taxes.
Deanna and Yama sought to recover those songs from Mr. Brown against his will. against his wishes and brought litigation to collect royalties on those songs.
My sister and I, Deanna, sued Warner Chappell, and my dad was named in the suit because he was a performer on the songs that we sued about.
Yama also claims that Brown is on their side during the entire process. The lawsuit is settled in Yama and Deanna Brown's favor, but it leaves a sour taste in the mouths of many who claim that Brown was incensed at his daughter's betrayal.
That did more to influence James Brown, to put his values and his assets and everything he had inside this trust to educate children and not leave it to his family than any trustee could have ever done.
Mr. Brown said to me, they don't know what that's cost them.
January 2007. While Tommy Ray Heiny fights to be recognized as Brown's rightful widow, his children wait to hear about their emergency petition to have Albert Dallas, David Cannon, and Alfred Bradley removed as trustees of the estate.
Mr. Brown's children wanted to become managers or trustees of the trust.
That's the thing about trustees, whether they would do a better job or whatever. That'd be like me, going into, say for example, walking on a job to drive a crane, and I've never driven a crane before.
Doing what the will and the trust directs. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Nothing pleased anybody. And the only person that should have been pleased was Mr. Brown. He directed it.
If he wanted you to run it, you'd have been running it.
Yama and Deanna Brown move forward and point to a clause in the I Feel Good Trust for Needy Children that allows the trustees to keep up to 50% of Brown's estate as administration fees. To them, an unheard of amount for a charitable trust.
We know most people are going to take up to 50%. If it allows them to, they're going to take it.
With the stage set for a three-way battle of wills over the estate of James Brown, differences within the Brown family lead to infighting. Brown's family is divided, with its members challenging each other's credibility.
If you lay cheese out, rats are eventually going to go get the cheese.
They wanted to paint this picture that we were lying, we just wanted more money, and that was it.
Grandson William James hits where it hurts.
There is no difference in hanging a black man from a tree in 1965 than there is hanging a black man in a courtroom in South Carolina in 2012.
James Brown's death leaves family members upset over how his estate is to be managed and divided. Two separate petitions are filed in order to contest Brown's last will and testament. February 20th, 2007. As requested by Brown's daughters Yama and Deanna, the court replaces trustees Albert Dallas, David Cannon, and Alfred Bradley with temporary trustees who will monitor the alleged wrongdoings. William James Brown can't believe it.
If he saw no right to get rid of these men at any time, who am I to pass judgment on them? Who am I to say they handled James Brown's business wrong? If James Brown thought his business was being handled just fine, who am I to offer an opinion about it?
I have only sought to carry out what Mr. Brown directed that I do. I didn't ask to be Mr. Brown's personal representative or trustee. I didn't ask for that job.
There are increasing tensions in the Brown family between those who oppose the will and those who accept it. William James and his father Terry stand by the will from the start.
Unlike the rest of my family, I don't want a dime from my grandfather. He's already given me everything I need. He's given me the tools to go out and compete in the world and make something of myself.
He took care of me, took care of my family. You know what I mean? What the hell can I say about the man because he didn't leave no money? It's his damn money. You know what I'm saying? And that's where the greed and all that craziness comes in, man.
For members of my family to try to perpetuate the idea that he was unduly influenced in some way, I think further shows how out of step, how out of touch, and how much they did not understand my grandfather.
The accusations put Yama Brown on the defensive.
They wanted to paint this picture that we were lying, we just wanted more money, and that was it.
It's just like if you lay cheese out, rats are eventually going to go get the cheese. That is to say, they all want to be something or have something that they're not entitled to, that they are not.
I mean, our family really thought about it and really talked about what our dad would have wanted. And what we know he would not have wanted was all this turmoil over his estate.
I don't know what my sister's after. You know, I can't speak for them. You know? I mean, if that's the case, if they're after something or whatever, I wish them luck. I hope they find it.
While Brown's 6 legitimate children are divided over the will, many others claim to be his illegitimate offspring.
Mr. Brown loved women. Let there be no doubt about that. And he never wanted for women.
The 1960s and 1970s are a time of free love, and that certainly proves true for James Brown.
He had wives, he had girlfriends, he had one-night stands, and he had people working for him who were sort of air traffic controllers who had to make sure that none of these bodies collided or ever met each other. It must have been a fearful job.
He was a player, man. He's James Brown, man. You know, what woman wouldn't want a man of power like that? You know, it ain't like he had to go out here and stand on the corner and wait. They came to him. Remember that.
But Brown's philandering will come back to haunt him. DNA tests prove that he fathers at least 3 illegitimate children over the years. As a result, Brown's illegitimate grandchildren will be eligible as beneficiaries of the Brown Family Education Trust. 2007, the temporary trustees hold an auction of Brown's belongings in order to cover legal fees and maintenance on his house. But this decision doesn't please everyone.
A lot of us were for it, but some of us were against it because some of the things that were sold were things that we did not agree on.
Unsatisfied by the current management of the estate, Brown's children decide to propose a settlement to the courts. They invite another key player in the battle against Brown's will to join them, Brown's widow Tommy Ray Heiny, mother of James Brown Jr.
Their son was our family, you know, that was like our brother, you know, and he's a kid. He's the same age as my son. And so we felt an overwhelming sisterly, brotherly responsibility to make sure he was going to be okay.
The settlement takes several months to prepare. It proposes to divide Brown's estate into 4 equal shares, one for his 6 adult children and another for Tommy Ray Heiny and James Brown Jr. The remaining 50% is to be split between the Brown Family Education and I Feel Good trusts.
Did Mr. Brown have the right to expect that his will and trust would be enforced by the court? Absolutely, as any other individual who makes a will and trust. They have the right to expect the courts to enforce it according to its terms.
The settlement is submitted to Judge Doyet A. Early in the Circuit Court of Aiken County, South Carolina in 2009. The settlement is approved on May 26, 2009. Dallas and his fellow trustees are shocked. Was justice truly served?
She, Tommy Ray, claimed to be the spouse, and now apparently is going to walk away with 25% of the total estate that has previously been entrusted to needy and underprivileged children, that I find to be absolutely unbelievable.
For William James Brown, the judge's decision is a slap in the face to his grandfather's original wishes.
I can say this much about it. There is no difference in hanging a black man from a tree in 1965 than there is hanging a black man in a courtroom in South Carolina in 2012.
How can there be any question about what Mr. Brown's intentions were? Read the document. It tells you unequivocally what he wanted. Why has the Attorney General of South Carolina turned its back on James Brown's wishes?
The decision represents a victory for Yama Brown. After all, half of Brown's estate is still being allocated to education.
We respected his wishes, and I still feel like we respect his wishes.
The two charitable trusts fall under the jurisdiction of the Attorney General of South Carolina.
They are there to make sure that that trust gets carried out. We asked for the judge to bring a party in that could help administer that. In other words, we as the family aren't even administering that. We won't even, quote unquote, touch that money. We'll help in the process determine who gets it and things like that.
As for the money itself, it's still tied up in legal red tape.
Do you know that not only has not one child received 1 penny to be educated, but 30+ lawyers have billed tens of millions of dollars in the face of those children not being educated?
5.5 years later, to my knowledge, not one dime. Isn't it ironic?
We couldn't do anything because we were tied up in this court, all this court stuff. So any monies that were coming in were going to more attorneys.
The underprivileged kids right now, those are the ones who are suffering. They suffering. They need educations, man. His grandchildren, their education ain't secure,
Mr. Attorney General, you have a fiduciary responsibility to help educate children. You have a responsibility to protect this trust. The legal courts in South Carolina, you have a responsibility to give a man due process, to give a man's will the respect it deserves.
In June 2007, Albert Dallas, David Cannon, and Alfred Bradley resign as trustees, or are forced to resign, according to Dallas, who points out what he sees as the bitter irony in all of this.
Whomever winds up doing all of this will be charging the same kind of fees that Mr. Brown provided for. And it was Mr. Brown's choice whom he wanted to carry out those duties. That's the thing that's so hurtful about all of this.
These were good men. They were decent men. They were honest men. They were loyal. They did what Mr. Brown, my grandfather, asked them to do, without question, without fail, every single time.
I've often thought, wouldn't it be great if Mr. Brown could walk into the courtroom, would be held to pay. Be held to pay.
Daryl and William James Brown have already paid their price for trying to uphold the Godfather of Soul's final wishes.
Does it hurt that you've been ostracized by your family? Of course it does. Does it hurt on holidays you can't see your family? You can't pick up the phone and say, hey, I love you. You can't gather together. Sure, those things hurt.
Like any other siblings, man, we have disagreements, we don't agree with each other all the time, you know what I'm saying? And we would like to be closer, at times.
But at the same time, I owe as much to my grandfather to do the right thing, to stand there, resolute and firm, to carry out his wishes, regardless of what the consequences are. Because in the end, without James Brown, there's no William Brown. Because he lived, I live. That's the bottom line to it.
It's a strain, man, you know what I mean? But the funny thing about it is that, you put us all together, we all look alike.
It's a lot of work for my brothers and sisters and I to continue on, but it's worth it. He came from nothing and built all of that. So the least I can do as his child is to continue it on in a positive way, in a way that would make him happy.
I love the man. He was my friend. He trusted me to see that his wishes were carried out, as I did for 24 years during his lifetime.
In the end, the music lives on.
James Brown, he's known as the Godfather of Soul, but he's really one of the most colossal figures in American pop music. I mean, this is a guy who really defined a sound, that sound being funk music, and its legacy just trickles on down through the decades.
Play Pass the Peas, play Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, play all that amazing music, play the funk. Just play it once, and it washes away all this other stuff.